April 8th, 1943, 27,000 feet above Conches, France. Through the icy glass of his Focke-Wulf 19085, Oberleutnant Ralph Hermikin could barely keep a straight face. Below, enormous silver shapes were climbing awkwardly toward his formation. He keyed his mic, grinning. "They've sent us flying milk bottles," he joked to his wingman, watching the bloated silhouettes struggle upward. 16 brand-new P-47C Thunderbolts of the U.S. 4th Fighter Group were making their combat debut. To German eyes used to slender Spitfires and dart-like Messerschmitts, these Americans looked absurd, barrel-bodied brutes with stubby wings and giant propellers that dwarfed anything in the Luftwaffe inventory. What none of them knew was that they were staring at the machine that would soon dismantle the Luftwaffe, piece by piece. Within 18 months, the flying milk bottle would become the most devastating fighter-bomber of the entire war, and the sound of its 8.50 caliber Brownings would define terror in German skies. Each had 3,400 rounds of ammunition and a combined rate of fire over 6,000 rounds a minute, enough to saw a fighter-sized target in half in 2 seconds. That arithmetic of destruction was baked into those massive wings from day one. Birth of a beast. Major Donald Blakeslee, commander of the 335th Fighter Squadron, spotted the Germans maneuvering for attack. A veteran of the RAF Eagle squadrons, he already understood what his men were about to learn. The Thunderbolt demanded a new kind of flying. Survival meant forgetting everything Spitfire and Hurricane pilots swore by. While Germany built feather-light interceptors for agility, Republic Aviation built a high-altitude juggernaut, an aircraft that relied on raw power, weight, and engineering resilience to rewrite air combat physics. Among the 56 American pilots over France that morning were future household names, aces in waiting who, that day, were novices behind a mountain of metal. Their opponents had been at war since 1939, veterans of Poland, France, and Russia. The Americans had 0 combat days. This is the story of how industrial logic crushed tactical brilliance, how a laughingstock turned into the Luftwaffe's nightmare, and how synchronized American Brownings erased the myth of invincible German fighters. Designing the monster. The legend began in June 1940, when commanders in Washington panicked as German fighters rampaged over France. They demanded a high-altitude interceptor to match the enemy's best. Chief designer Alexander Kartveli, a Georgian immigrant with a genius for over-engineering, delivered something no one expected. "It'll be a dinosaur," he told his team, but a dinosaur with perfect proportions. The prototype XP-47B, which first flew May 6, 1941, stunned onlookers. At 9,900 pounds empty, it outweighed its predecessor by 65%. A sprawling turbo-supercharger snaked through its rear fuselage, giving the P-47 its famously bloated shape. Test pilots reacted the same everywhere. "This thing actually flies." It did, and at altitude, it flew like nothing else. The Pratt & Whitney R280 Double Wasp, an 18-cylinder radial throwing out 2,000 horsepower, could hold that power all the way to 27,000 feet, while German engines were gasping for air. Exhaust-driven turbocharging turned thin atmosphere into sea-level density. Taming the Thunder. Major Hubert "Hub" Zemke's 56th Fighter Group discovered early what that power cost. Between September 1942 and January 1943, training accidents destroyed 41 aircraft and killed 18 pilots. The nickname "Pilot Killer" briefly belonged to the Thunderbolt itself. It would torque roll on takeoff, ground loop on landing, and dive with suicidal enthusiasm. Pilots discovered the terrifying phenomenon of compressibility, controls freezing rock solid as shock waves formed on the wings. Yet those who mastered the beast found a revelation. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, a farm kid from Oklahoma who would later score 27 victories, summed up his first flight. "It was like strapping yourself to a locomotive. The power was unbelievable. You didn't fly it, you aimed it." Trial by fire. April and May 1943 confirmed every German prejudice. P-47S couldn't turn with Focke-Wulfs or climb like Messerschmitts. In their first month, they lost 14 Thunderbolts for only 3 German kills. Colonel Joseph "Pips" Priller scoffed. "It flies like a truck and climbs like a pregnant cow." British observers joked the Americans' best evasive maneuver was simply unstrapping and running laps inside that cavernous cockpit. But something subtle was changing. German intelligence missed it completely. Every Thunderbolt that limped home was riddled with holes no other fighter would have survived. One returned with 21 cannon hits and more than 100 machine gun strikes, damage that would have snapped a Spitfire in two. The big radial engine, air-cooled and armor-plated, ignored wounds that would destroy liquid-cooled planes outright. When a P-47 actually got its guns on target, the effect was biblical. 8 heavy machine guns focused into a 6-foot cone created a zone where enemy planes simply ceased existing. Each bird could sustain fire for 30 seconds, an eternity in aerial combat. The day the laughing stopped. June 26, 1943, over Le Mans, 2nd Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson's 61st Squadron Formation returned from escort duty when 16 Focke-Wulfs dove from the sun. Johnson's Thunderbolt, last in line, took the brunt. 21 cannon shells exploded across the aircraft. The canopy shattered. Hydraulic fluid turned the cockpit into a red-streaked haze. Wounded and half-blind, Johnson tried to bail out, but a shell had welded the canopy shut. Trapped at 27,000 feet in a burning wreck, he leveled off and prayed. Somehow, the engine kept running. Then a lone German pilot fell in behind him and calmly expended 2 full ammo loads, every 20mm shell, every 13mm round, into Johnson's plane. Still the Thunderbolt flew. When the German finally glided alongside, out of ammunition, Johnson saw his astonished expression. The enemy saluted, then peeled away. Johnson landed his crippled aircraft in England. The crew chief stopped counting bullet holes after 200. The plane had been practically sawed apart, yet it brought its pilot home. That single event shattered German confidence and convinced American engineers they'd built something tougher than they understood. Finding the formula. By July 1943, U.S. pilots had decoded the Thunderbolt's real advantage. Colonel Zemke drilled the mantra: don't turn, don't climb low, use your weight, your power, your guns. In a dive, the P-47 was untouchable. From 30,000 feet it hit 550 miles per hour, beyond anything German fighters could match. Pilots like Walker, Bud, Mahurin developed the boom and zoom doctrine: attack from altitude in blistering dives, annihilate, and climb away before the enemy could react. Germans called the engagements Thunderbolt turkey shoots. When 425 rounds per gun converge at 300 yards, the result is less dogfight, more instant disassembly. Witnesses spoke of targets turning to confetti mid-air, wings severed, tails vaporized, sky filled with fragments. The arsenal in the air. August 17, 1943, Schweinfurt and Regensburg. The Allies launched their deepest raid yet into Germany. The P-47's short range shows its limit, but its guns show their promise. Major David Schilling's squadron intercepted twin-engine Bf-110 destroyers lining up to attack B-17s. Gunner Heinrich Roth survived to tell it later. The Americans came down like hammers from heaven. I fired, saw hits, but the fighter didn't even wobble. Then he fired. The aircraft ahead exploded, nothing left but fragments. In under a minute, 8 German fighters were gone. Each P-47 carried 900 pounds of ammunition, a storm of metal impossible to withstand. American rounds came mixed armor-piercing incendiary and tracer, creating streams that both tore and ignited. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabby Gabreski described it. You hit them with all 8, they explode. The pilot never even knows he's dead. High-altitude executioner. By late 1943, altitude became the Thunderbolt's kingdom. Its turbo-supercharger let it breathe freely at 30,000 feet, while German planes suffocated. On October 8, Ace Hans Philipp, 206 victories, led his unit against U.S. bombers at 28,000 feet. His Focke-Wulf stumbled in thin air. Robert Johnson spotted Philipp's aircraft, fired a 2-second burst from 300 yards, watched strikes run the fuselage, then saw it explode. No parachute. When word reached German high command, shock followed disbelief. Reports confirmed it. The Thunderbolt outclimbed, outdove, and, worst of all, wouldn't die. By November, Hermann Göring's investigators admitted the P-47 could reach 42,000 feet, dive near the speed of sound, and absorb punishment that would kill 3 fighters combined. The paddle-bladed Thunder. January 1944. England receives the upgraded P-472 with a 13-foot Hamilton Standard paddle blade propeller. Climb rate jumps from 2,200 to 3,000 feet per minute. Suddenly, the supposedly sluggish American can match any German at altitude. Veteran ace Heinrich Noker recorded the shock. We bounced them expecting the usual advantage. They turned into us and climbed. Schmidt was hit, gone in smoke. These are not the same machines we laughed at last year. The new propeller gave the Thunderbolt a literal voice. The deep, rolling thunderclap Germans could hear from miles away. Ground troops learned that rumble meant rockets, bombs, and total destruction were seconds away. By March 1944, external fuel tanks stretched range beyond 1,000 miles. The Luftwaffe could no longer pick and choose battles. To reach American bombers, they first had to fly through walls of P-47s. Ace Gunther Rahl, with 275 victories, described a March 6th encounter. Someone joked, "Here come the flying pigs." No one laughed 30 seconds later. They came down like an avalanche. 3 of ours vanished instantly. Their guns didn't fire bursts, just solid beams of flame. Fuel economy added insult to injury. German fighters drained tanks in minutes at full power. Thunderbolts could cruise efficiently for hours, hovering protectively above the bombers. By mid-1944, the sleeker P-51 Mustang took the deepest escort runs, freeing Thunderbolts for a new, ruthless specialty, ground attack. Flying artillery. April 1944 to D-Day, the P-47 evolves into the Allies' airborne sledgehammer. Its 8 guns shred trucks and locomotives. Its armor lets it dive through flak like a tank. With bombs and rockets added, it becomes a true multi-role devastator. The D-25 variant carries 2 1,000-pounders and a 500-pound belly bomb, equal to early medium bombers. Later versions strap 10 5-inch HVAR rockets, each packing a 105mm artillery blast. German Major Hans von Luck watched helplessly in Normandy. They came so low you saw the pilots' faces. Then came the rockets. A column of trucks vanished, 20 vehicles gone in one pass. Men called them Jabos, but these weren't fighter bombers. They were flying artillery. On June 6, 1944, invasion morning, 500 Thunderbolts guarded the beaches. Luftwaffe attempts to intervene cost them almost everything. Only one of 12 fighters from Oberleutnant Wolfgang Fischer's unit returned. They were everywhere, sea level to 30,000 feet. Their guns turned our machines into aluminum rain. That month alone, Thunderbolts destroyed 651 locomotives, 512 tanks, nearly 4,000 trucks, and thousands of horse-drawn wagons. German supply lines shrank into darkness. No daylight movement survived. The Pacific proves it. While Europe burned, the P-47 also thundered across the Pacific. Colonel Neil Kirby's 348th Group found its power ideal for long, punishing sorties over New Guinea. On October 11, 1943, he and 3 wingmen fought 40 Japanese fighters, downing 6 himself, the feat earning the Medal of Honor. Japanese ace Saburo Sakai wrote, "We called them monsters. Our cannon shells did nothing. I hit one dozens of times, and it flew away." The later P-47N, built for the Pacific, carried expanded fuel tanks, over 300-mile range, to escort B-29s to Japan. From short-legged mule to intercontinental warhorse in barely a year. Thunder versus jets. Even the Me-262 jet, racing at 540 miles per hour, wasn't safe. On November 27, 1944, Colonel John C. Meyer dove from 28,000 feet, hitting nearly 500 miles per hour, and caught a jet at level speed. His burst tore the German aircraft apart. Later, hot rod P-47M variants, with 2,800 horsepower from water methanol injection, reached 470 miles per hour, fast enough to intercept V-1 flying bombs and even jets climbing away. Major George Bostwick's succinct tactical note: "The jets are faster, but they can't turn and they can't take a hit." Operation Bodenplatte and retaliation by production. January 1, 1945, 900 German fighters strike Allied airfields. At one strip near Metz, they destroyed 22 Thunderbolts on the ground. A captured pilot sneered, "What do you think of that?" Major George Brooking just pointed at mechanics already clearing wrecks. By tomorrow, we'll have 40 new ones. How long will it take you to replace your pilots? Within 48 hours, new P-47DS gleamed on the tarmac. Germany lost 271 planes and 213 men that day, losses it would never replace. Republic Aviation rolled out 15,683 Thunderbolts, more than any other U.S. fighter. In peak months, one aircraft left the Farmingdale line every hour. Each demanded more than 65,000 parts, 8 miles of wiring, and 2,000 pounds of aluminum. Yet they were built faster than Germany could produce replacement aces. Training for triumph. By 1944, America graduated 30,000 pilots per year, each with about 400 flight hours, 4 times that of new German trainees. Fuel, ammo, spare parts, whatever was needed was endless. German cadets faced combat with fewer than 100 hours. Lieutenant Eugene Roberts recalled arriving in Europe with 420 hours logged. My first mission, I knew exactly what to do. The German I met couldn't possibly have had half my time. The enemy admits it. By 1945, even former mockers like Joseph Priller conceded defeat. The Thunderbolt is the best fighter bomber ever built. Guns that never jam, bombs like a medium bomber, rockets like artillery. We laughed in 43. We don't laugh now. Fuel gone, fields bombed, pilots exhausted, the Luftwaffe existed mostly on paper. New recruits developed Jabo fever, panic symptoms triggered by rumors of Thunderbolts nearby. Ground troops dove for cover the moment they heard that distinctive rolling thunder. Final tally. By victory's dawn, 3,752 enemy aircraft destroyed in air combat, 3,315 on the ground, 86,000 rail cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored vehicles, 68,000 trucks obliterated. In the Pacific, 697 Japanese aircraft, plus countless ships and vehicles. The 9th Air Force alone flew 213,873 combat sorties, dropped 120,000 tons of bombs, and fired 135 million rounds, achieving a 4.6 to 1 kill ratio and the lowest loss rate of any Allied fighter bomber. Aftermath and legacy. Captured German files tell the complete reversal. April 1943. Large, slow, minimal threat. December 1943. Significant threat above 25,000 feet. June 1944. Critical threat at all altitudes. March 1945. Best fighter bomber of the war. Engagement hopeless. At a 1985 reunion in Phoenix, former Luftwaffe chief Adolf Galland looked back with candor. We laughed at the P-47. We thought Americans built a bomber and called it a fighter. We were wrong. They built an American fighter, designed for mass production and survival. They understood air war as industry, not sport. Flying a captured P-47 after the war, Galland realized the truth. The cockpit was comfortable, visibility excellent, controls precise, the whole plane armored yet agile. When I saw that America had built 15,000 of these while fighting on 2 oceans, I knew we never had a chance. That terrifying chorus of 8 Brownings earned its nickname, Roosevelt's piano. German pilots said once you heard that music, it was already over. An American thunder. The Thunderbolt embodied the U.S. wartime soul, brute engineering backed by limitless supply. Every cable doubled, every system redundant, every weakness compensated by horsepower. Critics claimed it won through quantity, not quality, but combat data tells otherwise. Even with equal numbers, Thunderbolts usually prevailed. Their dense storm of .50 caliber fire didn't rely on perfect aim. Statistically, each 2-second burst guaranteed lethal hits. Its armor-piercing incendiary slugs burned at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, melting through aluminum before exploding inside. At 10,000 pounds empty, it was the heaviest single-engine fighter ever built. It could lift its own weight in ordnance, and it gave young pilots the power of small battleships in the sky. In barely 2 years, the clumsy milk bottle became Germany's airborne apocalypse. Today, inside the U.S. Air Force Museum at Dayton, a gleaming P-470 Thunderbolt rests under bright lights. On its placard, Statistics Service. Beside it, A strip of gun camera film captures a Focke-Wulf 190 vaporized by 8 converging streams of fire. Beneath it sits a quote from a captured German pilot in 1945. "We laughed when we first saw them. Fat, ugly machines that couldn't turn or climb. We stopped laughing when we realized they didn't need to. They pointed their guns, and we stopped existing." From laughter to terror, from ridicule to reverence, the P-47 Thunderbolt entered war as a joke and ended it as judgment. The thunder spoke, and over Europe, the sky belonged to America. Factories of thunder. To understand why the Luftwaffe collapsed under this storm, you have to look beyond the combat footage and into the factories that birthed the Thunderbolt. At its peak, Republic Aviation in Farmingdale, Long Island, turned out a completed P-47 every hour, day and night. Across the ocean of farmland in Evansville, Indiana, a brand new plant, built from cornfields in a single year, was delivering 500 aircraft a month by mid-1944. Each P-47 required 65,000 hand-fitted parts, 8 miles of electrical wiring, and 2,400 engine components machined to thousandths of an inch. The engine alone weighed over a ton and demanded tolerances that would have made pre-war engineers gulp. Yet thousands of these power plants were built by workers, many of them women, who, 2 years earlier, had never been near an airplane. Their precision outstripped anything Germany could hope to match while fighting under constant bombardment. Even the ammunition supply chain was breathtaking. Each sortie needed 3,450 caliber rounds, and the U.S. Army Air Forces were launching hundreds of Thunderbolts daily. That demanded over 10 million rounds per month, and the Lake City Arsenal in Missouri alone was producing 30 million monthly. Every cartridge measured to 10,000ths of an inch for flawless feeding through those wing-mounted Brownings. Fuel followed the same industrial rhythm. A single P-47 drank 100 gallons per flight hour, up to 300 gallons in combat mode with water methanol injection engaged. In late 1944, the 9th Air Force consumed 25 million gallons of high-octane fuel per month, all shipped across submarine-infested seas. The logistical miracle behind the Thunderbolt wasn't glamorous, but it ensured that when one aircraft burned, another was already en route. Training the storm. Equally staggering was America's investment in aircrew training. By 1944, the United States was graduating 30,000 pilots each year, more than Germany trained during the entire war. Every Thunderbolt flyer logged at least 400 hours before combat, including extensive gunnery, instrument navigation, and tactical workups. German rookies, by contrast, averaged under 100 hours and sometimes had never fired live ammunition before their first mission. Lieutenant Eugene Roberts remembered his arrival in England in 1944. "I'd practiced deflection shooting, watched film from real fights, studied the enemy's airplanes. The German I met that first mission couldn't possibly have had half my preparation." Professionalism had quietly replaced improvisation as the Allies' secret weapon. Industrial warfare, quantified. The scene at forward airfields told the whole story. Organized chaos, spare parts stacked like groceries, engines arriving in crates that said install and fly. When an aircraft limped home full of holes, crews patched it, refueled it, and sent it back up the next morning. Germany never recovered from that math. One U.S. factory produced more fighters per month than the Third Reich could build across all its surviving plants. That imbalance meant strategy essentially wrote itself. The U.S. could lose 10 Thunderbolts and replace them in days, while Germany could lose one ace and never replace his experience. Voices from the front. In early 1945, propaganda officers interviewed veteran ace Joseph Pips Priller, the same man who had once called the P-47 a pregnant cow. His response was so grim they couldn't publish it. "The Thunderbolt is the best fighter bomber ever built. It carries bombs like a medium bomber, fires rockets like artillery, and fights like a pure fighter when needed. They lose 10 and build 20. We lose 1, and it's gone forever. Their pilots arrive better trained than our instructors. We laughed in 1943, we're not laughing now." Every German frontline report echoed the same. Courage was abundant, fuel and replacements were not. Psychology of defeat. By April 1945, the Luftwaffe survived mostly as paperwork. Airfields were cratered wastelands. Jet fuel existed only for propaganda parades. Yet even had there been gasoline, no pilot wanted to face the Jabos. Veteran Klaus Brechschneider, one of the last students to qualify in 1945, flew a single combat mission. I saw 4 Thunderbolts diving out of the sun. A second later, my world exploded. In 12 seconds, my aircraft was gone. The sky rained aluminum. Psychologists at the time coined the phrase Jabo fever or Thunderbolt fever, a physical panic reaction to the sound of approaching radial thunder. Heart rate spiked. Pilots sweated in their cockpits before even seeing the enemy. For ground troops, that fear was equal. Mechanized units reported automatic stampedes to trenches the moment they heard that deep rumble over the tree line. A campaign in numbers. The final record reads like industrial poetry in steel and smoke. 3,752 enemy aircraft destroyed in aerial combat. 3,315 more smashed on the ground. 9,000 locomotives, 86,000 railcars, 68,000 trucks, 6,000 armored vehicles eliminated in Europe. In the Pacific, 697 aircraft shot down, 1,500 vehicles, and 150 locomotives obliterated. Total, 213,873 combat sorties, 120,000 tons of bombs, 135 million rounds fired, 60,000 rockets launched. The Thunderbolt maintained a 4.6-to-1 kill ratio in the air while recording the lowest attrition of any Allied fighter bomber. Every statistic represented a concept America had mastered: replaceability. The German view, on paper, captured archives from Ober-Ursel, the Luftwaffe Interrogation Center, show the most revealing document series of the war, German intel assessments of the P-47 evolving across 4 reports. April 1943, large, unmaneuverable, inferior, minimal threat. December 1943, exceptional high-altitude performance and extreme structural strength. Significant threat above 25,000 feet. June 1944, dominant fighter bomber. Devastating firepower. Difficult to shoot down. March 1945, best fighter bomber of the war. Direct engagement unsurvivable. It was the bureaucratic version of surrender. Peace in perspective. For decades later, at a 1985 reunion of combat veterans in Arizona, former Luftwaffe General Adolf Galland, once the head of Germany's fighter arm, faced his former enemies. Someone asked what he thought of the Thunderbolt. He smiled ruefully. "We made a terrible mistake in 1943. We saw this big, heavy airplane and laughed. We said the Americans had built a bomber and called it a fighter. But they didn't try to build a European fighter, they built an American one. A machine for a war of industry, not duels. They built the aircraft that could take punishment and still deliver it back tenfold. When I flew a captured P-47 after the war, I realized we never had a chance." Galland was struck most by 2 things: that the cockpit was comfortable and visibility superb, and that the United States had produced more than 15,000 of these intricate monsters while fighting on 2 oceans. "That was the moment," he said, "I understood industrial warfare." Roosevelt's piano. The 8 synchronized Brownings gave the Thunderbolt its unforgettable soundtrack. Germans nicknamed it Roosevelt's piano because once those guns began their rhythmic roar, the piece being played usually ended in fire. Technical engineers had refined the weapon system to near perfection. 8 independent ammunition boxes, electric booster motors to prevent jams under high G forces, and heating elements to keep them from freezing at altitude. Each gun could be charged individually. All were synchronized through adjustable convergence points from 150 to 400 yards. At a typical setting of 300 yards, a 2-second trigger squeeze filled a 6-foot sphere with molten metal. Anything inside vanished. Quality versus quantity. Critics sometimes argue the Allies won by overwhelming numbers. The combat data disagrees. Even when squads met 1-to-1, Thunderbolts prevailed in most cases. Why? Because its firepower wasn't about elegance, it was about probability mathematics. German 20mm cannon carried 120 to 200 rounds total and demanded exquisite aim. The P-47's massive battery carried 3,400 rounds and didn't need perfect alignment. A burst statistically guaranteed lethal hits. Each round's delayed fuse incendiary core burned at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, igniting structure and fueling cascade. Compared to German shells that often exploded on contact, the American bullet penetrated first, then burned. To the pilot being hit, that difference meant instant structural failure instead of cosmetic fireworks. Engineering excess. Everything inside the P-47 was redundant. Control cables doubled end-to-end. Engine mounts tested to 12 Gs. Wing spars rated for 40,000 pounds, triple the plane's full weight. Hydraulics were shielded behind armor plate. The windscreen was half-inch bullet-resistant glass. Deflection plates wrapped the oil cooler like a tank turret. The result was overbuilt survival. Mechanics joked you didn't repair a Thunderbolt, you just topped off the fuel and patched any part that wasn't glowing. Industrial symmetry. Republic Aviation wasn't just building an airplane, it was mass-producing an idea that technology, assembly lines, and logistics could compensate for any tactical shortfall. Every step tied into a vast lattice. Pratt & Whitney in Connecticut shipping engines. Goodyear in Ohio making tires. Remington Arms filling belts with cartridges. Railroads delivering crated components 24 hours a day. Germany had brilliant engineers but collapsing infrastructure. America turned conveyor belts into strategic weapons. The last days. By early 1945, Thunderbolts were the muscle of the advancing Allied armies. As the front swept across France and Belgium into Germany, their roar became as constant as artillery. P-47s obliterated bridges, convoys, and depots, hammering enemy logistics even as tanks advanced. Fuel depots vanished overnight. Trains exploded before they could unload. Roads turned silent in daylight. German commanders admitted they could move troops only under cloud cover. By April 1945, the Luftwaffe could muster only scattered flights. When they did take off, Thunderbolts met them almost instantly. Those encounters rarely lasted more than seconds. From derision to dominance. 2 years. That's all it took for mockery to turn into myth. The same pilots who had nicknamed it the milk bottle now spoke of the P-47 as if it were an elemental force. Veterans who had faced Spitfires and Yaks without flinching lowered their voices when remembering Thunderbolts. At the U.S. Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio, a restored P-470 gleams beneath perfect lighting. Its spec sheet lists horsepower, ceiling, armament, but the real story sits in a small glass case nearby. A strip of gun camera film showing a Focke-Wulf 190 disintegrating under converging fire. Below it, a quote from an unnamed captured pilot reads, "We laughed when we first saw them, fat and clumsy. We stopped laughing when we realized they didn't need to turn or climb. They just pointed their guns, and we stopped existing." The sound of victory. The P-47 didn't win wars through elegance. It won through relentless, engineered certainty. It proved that in total war, survivability and firepower matter more than grace. It entered combat as a joke of proportions and left the battlefield as the embodiment of American industrial thunder, part machine, part myth, all inevitability. When the last Luftwaffe squadron fell silent and Europe's skies echoed with distant rumbles of returning Thunderbolts, one thing was clear. The laughter that had greeted those flying milk bottles in 1943 was gone forever. The thunder had spoken, and the sky belonged to America.